The three-person city attorney's race features charges, counter-charges, and significant money. Then many San Diegans who thought they were signing a petition discovered they'd been registered as members of a brand new political party. Measure C tax revenue would expand the convention center and benefit the homeless. So why is a homeless advocate against it? And Measure A will force a county-wide vote on some housing developments. I'm Jade Hindman. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Jade Hindman. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Jennifer Bowman of iNews Source, Eric Anderson of KPBS News, Claire Trageser of KPBS News also, and Scott Lewis of Voice of San Diego. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
So the San Diego City Attorney is the chief legal advisor to the mayor, 9 city council members, and all city departments. The office handles some 20,000 misdemeanor cases and 200 new civil cases each year. The current city attorney is Mara Elliott, who's running for her second term. 2 candidates are running to replace her. They are attorney Corey Briggs and former deputy city attorney Pete Message. So Scott, start by telling me about Mara Elliott. What are her interests? How long has she been in office?
Well, she's been in for a full term now, almost. There's been a debate for about a decade about the city attorney's office. It's an elected position, so does it really represent the people, or is it the lawyer for the city? And she came into office with this perspective that she was going to be kind of a quiet lawyer for the city. But as they all do when they get into that space, they realize how powerful that post really is. And she's been very political and very forward with a lot of issues, from surveillance and the cameras that came out to this lawsuit she's taken. She might shut down Instacart, that grocery app. There's all kinds of things that she's taken a front row seat on, or a leading edge on, and it's caused a little bit of controversy. And
you mentioned the surveillance cameras. Tell me a bit more about that. Those were the smart streetlights, right?
Yeah, they were sold to the public and to the city council as a way to help clean up traffic and the environment. And she came out just kind of randomly the other day and said, look at how great they are at solving crimes. And that was never part of how it was sort of set in motion. And so, again, she's been really the face of a lot of very controversial issues.
And didn't she also try to weaken the California Public Records Act?
Yeah, she did that. She partnered with State Senator Ben Hueso to put up a bill that would have taken the only enforcement part of the California Public Records Act out of it. Later, they abandoned that after a ton of scrutiny. So again, she was right in the middle of a very controversial issue.
And didn't she make a big point of saying that she's for transparency, and that was one of the things that she was pushing in the campaign?
Yeah, exactly. She came off to me in the campaign 4 years ago as the least interested in transparency, mostly just wanted to serve, wanted to not be in front of all these issues. But then when she made the justification for this law, she said, well, it just hurts. It's a burden for all these public agencies, but it really would have made it impossible to enforce the Public Records Act, and that's the only thing we have.
Interesting. And Jennifer, arguably her most well-known opponent is Corey Briggs. Tell me about him, and what kind of law does he practice?
So Corey Briggs is well known for suing public agencies, including the city of San Diego. His name comes up in some of the biggest disputes you see, anything from a waterfront project to any environmental concerns. And he typically represents nonprofits. One of his most frequent clients is San Diegans for Open Government. And he, in fact, has filed over 20 lawsuits against the city, some of which he's filed since he's announced he's running for city attorney. Sometimes he wins. Sometimes he loses in court, and supporters see him as an advocate, a fighter against City Hall, fighting for the taxpayer. Those who don't believe that see him as someone who uses the practice of suing to cash in and make a living.
And he's attacked Elliott on a number of fronts. What's his beef?
Yeah, so a couple of things that Scott mentioned. The Public Records Act, that happened about a year ago now, but it continues to become a major point as far as the campaigns go. In the Smart Streetlights program, Corey Briggs has raised concerns about the surveillance and privacy standards and the collection and the access that a private company would have. And he's also zeroed in, as well as Mara Elliott's other opponent, Pete Message into her ownership of General Electric stock. GE owned at one point the startup that was installing the sensors, and he's raised allegations of conflicts of interest.
And I know back in 2015, iNewsSource investigated how Corey Briggs conducted his private practice. What did Brad Racino, who's a reporter with you all, find out back then?
So we looked at dozens of nonprofits that Corey Briggs represented and found that he had played a role in forming many of them, whether it is helping incorporate the nonprofit, whether the addresses match his law firms, board membership. A lot of the board members were actually overlapping and matching other nonprofits. And we found that more than half were out of compliance with state and federal disclosure laws. So filing documents that show your finances, your board membership, your board structure, your mission statement, things like that, had not been filed as required. And so we looked at that again as he announced his city attorney run and found that much had not changed.
And you need those. You need a client in order to sue, right? That's
correct.
That was the reason for
correct. So there have been allegations from attorneys on the other side in court who have argued that nonprofits represented by Briggs are shell corporations or a mere alter ego of their counsel, and some of those have been decided or not decided in court.
So none of this led to any changes in the way Briggs operates his practice?
He continues to sue under nonprofits. We have seen that some have stayed in compliance. He has gotten in trouble for, or at least been investigated by the State Bar Association for representing nonprofits that were not in good standing, not in active standing as far as filing those required documents. This time around, we didn't necessarily see that, but we do continue to see that these nonprofits have for years failed to file documents, and some receive cease and desist orders from the state attorney general for not filing those.
So tell me a little bit about Pete Message, the final candidate.
So Pete Message is the third candidate in this race, and judging from a UT and 10 News poll from earlier this year, it may be an uphill battle for him. He came in third as that, but he has experience as a deputy city attorney and has raised some of the same concerns that you hear from Corey Briggs when it comes to Mara Elliott, as far as being a city attorney who's more like a politician and not the head of a law firm, and getting involved in that way. And he also has raised conflict of interest concerns when it comes to that Smart Streetlights program.
All right, something I know you guys will continue to follow. Moving on, what if you thought you were signing a petition for, say, rent control, and instead you were actually signing yourself up for a political party you never even heard of? That's been the experience of dozens of San Diegans, as KPBS investigative reporter Claire Dressiger uncovered. Claire, this story, it involves a new political party called the Common Sense Party. Tell me about this party, who founded it, and what is it?
Well, so it's a new party that I think is aiming to be sort of like a moderate middle ground to the Democrats and Republicans, who are, especially in California, increasingly polarized. Started by retired Republican Congressman Tom Campbell, who also ran for Senate a couple times, I think, in California and lost, and then an independent state assemblyman. And then locally, we have Julie Meyer-Wright, who was in Governor Pete Wilson's cabinet and used to head the Regional Economic Development Corporation here in San Diego. So they're kind of the big names who are behind it.
So how did you stumble across this story?
Well, it was interesting because it started out as just kind of looking at this new up-and-coming party and, you know, do they have a shot of disrupting the two-party system in California? And I wanted to talk to people who had registered for the party about, you know, what did you like about the party? Why'd you decide to join? So I just started calling people. I got the list of registered voters from the Registrar of Voters, and the first person said, "The what? The the what party? I don't know what that is." The next person kind of said the same thing. I just kept calling people, and I ended up talking to 31 people. 30 of them had never heard of the party, didn't know anything that I was talking about, and all of those 30 were signed up by signature gatherers, whereas the one person who had intended to sign up had signed up online.
It's all astonishing. We've got some video here of you with an SDSU student named Cameron Dollinger. Set this up for us. What did he think he had done originally, and what happened?
Right, so he says he was just shopping for groceries at the Trader Joe's on campus, and someone was outside and said, "Oh, are you registered to vote?" If not, I can sign you up right now. So he said, okay, and he just filled out a really small form with just his name and address and birthday, driver's license number, I believe. But then I went and got his actual registration form that was filed with the Registrar of Voters and showed it to him. So then this happened.
Oh, no. This is not something I recognize. That is not my handwriting. I don't remember signing this form out.
Wow. I mean, if you hadn't found this out, what would have happened had he tried to vote?
Right. So, I mean, it's very complicated because there's all these different, because the Common Sense Party is not yet an officially qualified party in California, he would be treated as a no party preference voter. And so if he voted by mail, say, and he, wanted to be a Democrat or was planning to vote in the Democratic primary, he would get his mail ballot, open it up and say, oh, where's the Democratic presidential primary race? It's not on here. He still could then vote in that race, but he would need to call the registrar or go in and say, I need a new ballot, like specifically request a Democratic ballot. And if he was planning to vote in the Republican primary, he couldn't, because you have to be a registered Republican to vote in the primary.
There are three really interesting parts of this. One is the governor just signed a bill that says you can change your party preference now over the next week, right? The other part is there is a definite appetite among people who, like Julie Meyer Wright locally, were Republicans at one time, but aren't on board this loyalty to Trump train, right? So they're very frustrated, or even never Trumper types. And so there's this idea that there needs to be an alternative to the Democrats. And so Claire's story is a real bombshell because they were actually trying to get some momentum along the lines of oh, look, we are creating that alternative to the Democrats. And then I think, well, I forgot my third point.
It's all right, but I'm curious to know, as they are working to create this party, how many people are actually members of this new party, and how many may have just been enrolled in error? I mean, any sense for that?
Well, yeah, so they say they have about 19,000 people statewide, about 5,000 in California. Based on my, it's not a scientific, I did call people randomly, but it's a pretty small sample size. But I talked to an SDSU statistics professor who said that could mean 83% of them were signed up. So that's about 4,000 people. I don't know how that correlates statewide. I'm, working on following up on that to see if this is a trend across the state.
Wow. Sounds like it didn't quite work out so well.
I don't, it's nothing against the party. They're trying to be this alternative. And when I talked to them, originally for the story, it was more the point of we wish we didn't have parties. We want to just be an alternative. The problem is this polarized party system. I think it's just using signature gatherers is maybe what led to their issues.
Let me make that. I'm sorry, I remember
Was that your third point?
Yeah, the signature gathering infrastructure in California is a very important political force, and they get paid per signature gathered, and so they're incentivized in a very odd way to make that close happen, and they usually serve as a sort of fifth arm to government where they can be a veto power over some law that gets passed or add a new law to the ballot. But to have them in this realm, actually trying to create a new party and then incentivized to just get people into that with whatever means necessary is a fascinating development.
Yeah. Maybe not as much common sense as they had hoped.
Hey!
There you go. Well, who was in charge of the signature gathering?
Well, so it's the firm that they hired is the La Jolla Group, which is based in Kearney Mesa, and they've done several other petition drives. I think they did the Newland Sierra that Eric had covered. So it's pretty well known. I think a firm that people go to a lot for these types of drives. But yeah, to Scott's point, I think one thing is usually you're collecting signatures for a petition to maybe overturn something the legislature has done or something like that. Not really to register people for a specific party. Like when you sign a petition, they'll say, are you registered to vote? Because you need to be registered to sign, and then they can register you. But they don't in the past haven't been also gotten paid by a specific party to sign people up for that party. So it's kind of this like competing interests where they're trying to attract additional people.
Well, it's great you're shining a light on it, Claire. Moving on, the push here to expand the San Diego Convention Center is attracting money and some heat. Amassing more than $2 million in donations ahead of the March primary, Measure C calls for an increase in the city's hotel room tax to raise billions of dollars to expand and operate the convention center, and provides funds for homeless programs and street repairs. The devil, though, is in the details, which some find a bit sketchy. Scott, San Diego has been really trying to enlarge the convention center for years. Why has that not really worked out?
It's an odyssey of failure, like for 10 years of just, they tried to raise the tax without going to the vote of the people. That failed. Court threw that out. They've tried in various ways. Now they finally have something on the ballot. The real difficult part is that they need, or it's assumed they need 2/3 of the vote. Now there's a way they might be able to get through with a simple majority, but that's kind of a lark.
So Eric, tell me about Measure C.
Yeah, Measure C is it's pretty easy on its face, right? If you vote yes for Measure C, you're voting to basically raise the tourist tax, the hotel room tax that visitors and others pay when they stay in a hotel. If your hotel is closer to the convention center, you're going to get a higher tax increase, about 3.25%. Farther away, you can get as low as 1.25%. But basically, they're raising billions of dollars. And 59% of that money will go toward the convention center improvement. The first 5 years, if this measure is passed, the first 5 years, the other 41% will go toward homeless programs, which are yet to be defined. And then the 5th year and the 6th year in, they'll take a quarter of the money set aside for the homeless, and they'll use it to do street repairs.
Okay, and obviously, of course, there are conflicting opinions, of course, about what it will actually do. So here's Carol Kim, who is the convention center board, with her take.
We're going to raise this tax and spend it specifically on 3 things, 3 specific buckets: the convention center expansion, homelessness, streets and roads.
So Scott, what's the problem with a measure that does all these things?
Well, it rests on a bunch of assumptions. One is, the cost of the convention center will be something we can handle. The last estimate was like $700 million, and they said it would go up $3 million a year. So if they don't break ground, or $3 million a month, if they don't break ground in like 2021 or by then, that could be $1 billion project. And so can we handle that much debt and still make room for all of these other promises we've made? They're also believing that would create 7,000 jobs. Those numbers are a little weird. There's also a lot of promises about how much will be freed up for homelessness and services after that. But those, again, all rest on certain things happening with the economy and with the conventions filling the homes or the hotels around the area, and then churning off more hotel tax revenue. All of those are gambles. They're betting a lot of money on a lot of different promises that they're going to have to fulfill.
And while they have that big promise to expand the convention center, they don't have a specific idea yet what that expansion would look like. And it includes money for homeless programs, but there's no specific design that says a certain amount will go toward this particular area, constructing homes, or a certain amount will go toward programs. And the street repairs too, it's sort of undefined. They leave it in the hand of the council if the measure gets approved.
I mean, one of the big worries is the state has provided the city a lot of money recently to deal with homeless issues, and there's a very real possibility that this money will be needed to make sure that if the state ever pulls out, that it's there. But on the other hand, people like Barbara BRIGGS running for mayor see that as the main source of funding actual homes, permanent supportive housing for homeless residents. And so I think, it's such an amorphous blob of money right now that everybody can say it's going to do what they want it to do, and yet there's no specific plan in the actual measure.
Voice of San Diego, you guys did a report on Michael McConnell and his opposition to Measure C. Why has that created such a stir?
Well, again, when you need 2/3 vote, really nobody can be against it, as in an organized, funded way. He spent what looks like about $300,000 opposing this, of his own fortune, against this. And so, he says, it's because of all these concerns about the risk, and he actually worries that that will make it harder to raise taxes or provide money for homeless services for other actual homes that he wants to see built. But also, I think underlying that is that they didn't actually listen to his concerns or negotiate with him enough when he was part of the discussions when this was being formulated. And so, he said, look, I'm going to spend the money against it. And they called his bluff, and it wasn't a bluff. And now we'll see if that really does sink the measure or not. That's a big issue.
Because you always say, I mean, you can't have any organized group against it. This isn't, I mean, it's not a group, it's just a person. But I don't know if anyone was expecting him to then, he sold his business to?
He sold his business and used the money for that specifically to invest in this. And there's so many mailers, so many Facebook ads against it. I covered a hotel room tax increase in 2004. There was just one mailer against it, and they credited that with getting it under that 66%. And so $300,000 could have a significant impact.
And Eric, you talked to Donna Fry about Measure C. Here's part of what she had to say.
Is they've tried to combine it, the hotel guys have tried to combine it with homelessness and roads and make it sound like it's really for homeless people and for roads when there is no guarantee. There is absolutely nothing in the measure that says any housing will be built for the homeless.
And the point to make too is that the three major funders of the Yes or a Better San Diego campaign are the three hotels right around the convention center. It's the Manchester Grand, it's the Marriott, and it's the Hilton. And they would all benefit tremendously if the convention center is expanded. And if you look at some of the flyers that have been circulated on this issue, it tends to highlight the homeless. The money being set aside for homeless doesn't really mention the convention center, although it's pretty clear when you set aside 59% of the funding for one thing, that's a pretty big chunk of money. And this tax isn't for 10, 20, or 30 years and then it retires. It's a tax in perpetuity. It will literally raise billions and billions of dollars for the city of San Diego, these three projects.
Well, taking a look at another measure, building new housing developments in San Diego's rural backcountry will get a lot more difficult if Measure A passes. Right now, the Board of Supervisors can approve developments in rural areas that fall outside the county's general plan guidelines. With Measure A, voters countywide would weigh in on projects with 6 houses or more if those projects require an amendment to the general plan. Eric, when was the general plan adopted, and when has it ever been able to just be changed?
Well, the general plan is just something the county threw together in 2 weeks. No, this was a multi-year process, right? It took a long time. It took years. They got input from all the stakeholders, the communities in the San Diego, unincorporated areas in San Diego County. When they finally put it in place, what they said was, look, we're going to design a plan for growth that allows for growth, but it's going to allow for growth in these certain corridors that are connected to services that are inside the San Diego County Water Authority's ability to deliver water to those areas, for example, was one of the things they used as a guideline. And we're going to try and concentrate development there where it makes sense, and that will keep us from having these sprawl projects. Projects that are out in the middle of nowhere but pop up with 2,000 homes and amenities. But the problem is that this was passed in 2011, and within the next few years, more than a dozen large sprawl projects were presented to the county, went through the county planning process, and got approval from the county supervisors. Many of those are being challenged in court. A couple are probably going to lose out if legal rulings that have already been issued stand. But what people in the area and people who are concerned about development said was, like, look, we need to do something that kind of takes this out of the hand of the county supervisors and gives people a voice. And that's what Measure A is designed to do. It's a countywide vote for projects outside of general plan guidelines.
Susan Baldwin, president of San Diegans for Managed Growth, talks in this clip here about who had input to the general plan in the 8 years it took to craft it.
Business interests, the building industry, community members, environmentalists. And so if the plan needs to be changed, then there should be an a review of the plan as a whole, not individual projects being approved in a piecemeal fashion.
So So then what were the reasons for curtailing housing development in some of the rural areas?
What planners looked at was, does it make sense to build a housing project in a particular area? For example, if you have a city that is here and you decide to build a housing project here, you have to build roads to connect that. You have to run services there. You have to run water lines. You have to run electricity.
Fire.
You have to build all the infrastructure. You have to protect it from fire, which has been known to happen in San Diego County. And all those things carry a cost with them, and not the least of which is the traveling back and forth between the populated areas and this isolated development area, which is greenhouse gas emissions, which makes it more difficult for the county to comply with state greenhouse gas emission goals. Those are the reasons why they decided to kind of move the development around existing services.
Do you all think that this measure can pass? I mean, won't people be resistant to making it harder to build new housing?
Well, that's what the opponents are banking on, is this idea that if we don't allow these things, then people will move to Riverside and stuff like that. But there's been a long-standing movement, I think, along the lines of we should have urban limit lines, and the growth should happen in the urban areas to deal with greenhouse gases or not. And that's a big, the general plan actually created a weird incentive where agricultural land was valued at this much because you can't build homes, and so people wanted to buy it, and now they want to upzone it.
All right. With this, we could go on and on. We got to wrap really quick, folks. That wraps up another week of stories here at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to give a big thanks to all of our guests. Have a good night. Check us out at kpbs.org.